Wednesday LinkedIn live chat. We are very fortunate to be joined by Michel Bekkers. Michel, thank you for joining us. How are you and where are you in the world today?
I'm doing fine, and again, thank you for this opportunity. My pleasure.
No, fantastic. We love the Christmas tree in the background. Where in the world are you located?
I am calling in from beautiful Denver, Colorado, where it's sunny and snowy.
Perfect, perfect. I'm here in Michigan as always, where it's cloudy, cold, and snowy. Not desirable. We were just talking a little bit about that. I know you spent a brief time in Michigan, and or not a brief time. You were here for a while. So you're familiar with that. And Scotty, as always, is in the mountains. He is monitoring for questions and feedback. So that is my cue to invite the Treasury community. We obviously will be having a conversation with Michel, but if you have any questions or if there's anything that he mentions along the way that you'd like him to expand on or you'd like us to expand on, please drop a comment, drop a question. We're more than happy to answer that. But with that, we'll get right into it. So Michel, you are the founder and principal of R Square Consulting right now, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Awesome.
And that is a consulting business.
Definitely. And you're originally from Belgium. You spent some time in the US and in Germany throughout your Treasury career. What have some of those highlights been from the career? And talk to me about the major differences between the different geographies.
It's a good question. I think the highlights for me is really personal enrichment. Personal enrichment means for me as a person, I wouldn't recommend doing this, for financial enrichment, even though that may happen. But if that's the primary purpose, I would probably not recommend it because it's not guaranteed. But the opportunities I've had to work, in different countries with different people has been outstanding. And I think that's one of the best things of my life. Also, I happened to meet my wife on one of my international assignments, and I'd like to think, that's probably one of the best things that happened to me. But one of the things I've really learned, and it's actually, I can explain with a small example. If you have two individuals that are looking at a number, and one individual says that the number 6, and the other individual says, no, that's the number 9, they're both right. And they can actually start talking beside each other and absolutely being convinced they're right. It's something that I've learned, with working with people in different parts of the world, and I will get in specifically to Germany and the US as well, is that people have their own priorities, and how they define their own priorities is how they will view the world. I think they can have the same core values and probably should have the same core values, like integrity. I think that is part of every culture you like. But all people have different priorities, and if you sense those priorities, you need to adapt. You can't go into a country and say, well, I don't agree with these priorities, I'd like to change that. Well, chances are you're not going to change those priorities. And I can give some examples. I worked with the Middle East extensively. People are never really in a rush, and I'm saying typically because they put a lot of emphasis on building a personal relationship, and you need to appreciate that. Yeah. And so when it comes to the US and Germany, I thought about that quite a bit, because moving from Belgium to the US was less of a culture shock than it was moving from Belgium to Germany. The reason is, I think the US is very much a principles-driven culture. Yeah. That has disadvantages as well, because people may stick to their principles, no matter what happens and that type of thing. So, but I've noticed, that moving to Germany is a very rules-driven society, and I've never lived in a rules-driven society. I think Germany is probably, Belgium is probably a little bit more principles-driven. So Germany is very rules-driven. There's the rules for everything, and it has a lot of advantages because things become very effective. If things are being rules driven, sometimes have this advantage because it's not being questioned enough. But I've noticed that when you go to these cultures, you need to understand that, and you can only learn it by living in it. People will say, well, I have the wanderlust in me, I am open to different cultural experiences. But in the end, you need to live a culture before you need to live in it before you can sense what it is like. Visiting a place usually doesn't make the cut. And so I would probably say it's not for everyone, to be a global citizen. I know a lot of people I grew up with that never really spend any time in another country. They're perfectly happy. For me, I think it's one of the best things I've ever done.
Yeah, it seems like there are a lot of similarities between being a good global citizen and being able to adapt to other cultures and just being a quality leader at the same time. You mentioned just being able to meet people where they're at, accepting other people the way that they are, and it comes along with empathy. It comes along with emotional intelligence. I mean, to completely immerse yourself in another culture, you kind of have to just put all ego aside, much like being a leader, and just kind of meet people where they're at, and be sensitive to the fact that you're not the only person in the world. It doesn't revolve around you.
That's absolutely right, Joe. And what I say is the personal enrichment. I think it makes you a better person, and a better decision maker, because you understand that people have different perspectives and that you need to understand what their priorities are.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's that advice you just gave could probably be the answer to this next question. But curious, if you had to give yourself one piece of advice, way back at the beginning of your career that now, what would that be?
That's also, Scotty, and I appreciate that question, because I've given that thought, because one also has to look back and ask themselves, what if I had additional information? What could I have done better? And one thing that really stands out for me is I probably, if I had known certain things, I would have maybe chosen different route. What I'm saying is, I think when I grew up, when I went to university, it was almost a given, that you would apply, with the big corporation, work for the government, but work with fairly big organizations. I knew pretty much what I wanted to do, and I wanted to be in finance. I wanted to be in international finance, and it seemed that was an obvious place. But I talked to a person, many years thereafter. He said, people need to also look into whether they want to be in a private equity or whether they want to actually be part of a startup. And I have always wanted to pursue innovation, come up with something new, create something new. And sometimes I wish I had had a mentor at the start of my career, or maybe at university, saying, Michel, there's also a range of possibilities outside of the scope that you're looking at. So I wish sometimes I had a wider scope of reality and looking into other possibilities as well, because I think I would have been pretty good at working for a startup or even private equity. It has certain advantages. I can elaborate on that, but that's the one thing that I would have given as advice, is open your eyes, open your horizon, and into where you best apply your skills and your wishes.
Yeah, that's incredible that you've upon that self-reflection that you've realized that. Scotty and I have talked about it previously because we both worked for large organizations. I've worked in startup environments before, and we're very much in a startup environment right now. And it's just that it takes a different level of creativity. You're exercising different muscles, you're building stuff. It's not it's not you're just a cog in the wheel. It's, if you don't do this, then it doesn't get done, and maybe the business is failing. So you almost have to have, I call it a productive paranoia, but there's like a creativity that's constantly, your mind's always on, and there's always a challenge or a fire to be put out.
Yeah, that is exactly right.
So knowing that you've had the career that you've had a lot of success throughout the course of it. What's been your approach to networking and mentorship throughout your career, and what advice would you give to the audience in that area?
Yeah, networking. I think it can be overdone, and I'll explain that because people will tell me it's not what you know, it's who you know, and every lunch is a networking opportunity. I do believe networking will open a door, and maybe will give you a seat at the table. Once you have that seat at the table, you got to show that you can add some value as well. Yeah. And so, if you're networking, just because you want to be liked, you want to be appreciated, I think that's probably the wrong mindset. And I think, when it comes to networking, you can take any opportunity, but you need to put in the time, invest the time, and give something without expecting anything in return. And I think that will, build a valuable network. And I would encourage everyone to do that, because in the end, it is important, that you have a network where you can exchange ideas, where you can exchange thoughts. And I think that for me is the primary value of networking. You can become a better decision maker, or you can discover things you had not discovered before, think about things that you had not thought of before. And I think that's why networking is incredibly important, also for Treasury people. Go out and network with those Treasury people, but be prepared to give something without necessarily expecting something in return. This is, how you do it, how you think about it. And I think those are very powerful things. So I would encourage anyone to do that, but don't network, because you just want to be liked.
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
And you're preaching to the choir. I think one of the common questions Scotty and I get quite a bit is, well, how do I network? Should I, now that I'm looking for a job, that's when I should be networking? It's like, no, what you don't realize is in your subconscious, you're making this effort because you need something from someone else. And that's not necessarily the worst time to network, but it comes across in your conversations and your interactions with people. That's why we always preach, network when you have a job and when you're happy, because that's usually when you can do it the most effectively. You focus on the value, and you're still budgeting your time. You're not trying to figure out what you can get out of somebody else.
Yes. And again, I found, some of the most valuable initiatives I've taken part in were also great networking opportunities. But as an example, I was on the advisory board for HSBC. And, of course, that's a networking thing, but the exchange of thought and information and sharing different perspectives is tremendously powerful. And so I really enjoy those things, because, it's an opportunity to create new thoughts and new ideas.
Yeah, definitely.
So Michel, you already talked a little bit about the benefits and even potential drawbacks of being a global citizen. Curious for those in the audience that are interested in a similar path, what practical advice do you have for somebody who is interested in becoming a global citizen?
Yeah, one thing is it's been tremendously valuable for me. It doesn't mean it will be valuable for everyone out there. I think I said that earlier. I think, Scotty, you'll appreciate, the wanderlust, right? Is people will say, that they want to explore the world and have different experiences, but you need to make sacrifices as well. And, I am from Belgium, as you know. My parents, I'm still happy to have them. They're in Belgium, but I've not seen them over a year. You could also say, my spouse's parents live in Alaska, and guess what? We've not seen them for over a year either, because it's almost as far away as Europe. But that's definitely something of a disadvantage. You can look at statistics, and I think I remember seeing something like 90 or 95% of the world's population lives within 20 miles of where they were born. And that has advantages, because, my family at this moment is not my major support. My friends are my major support. You could say the friends or the family that you choose to have. But I've built up a tremendous friendships, over these years in many different places in the world, and still keep those friendships. But I feel a little bit sorry that at some point you have to sacrifice other relationships as well by being a global citizen. You can't have it all. And so I think you also need to embrace, the differences, that you will have in these different places. Just like you said, if you go and live in Germany, be prepared to deal with pretty complex things, that you wouldn't think of. And not everyone speaks English in Germany. So be prepared to learn that language if you want to get around. And so, you need to be totally open-minded to do that, and also realize, you need to make sacrifices as a global citizen because of the reason that I just said. You can't have it all in the same place.
Yeah, I love that. I think the key takeaway for me in that is to your point, to be prepared to make sacrifices, because I do think that we speak to a lot of people who are interested in coming here to the U.S., for instance, or going elsewhere in the world away from their home country. And, you know, for somebody like myself, who quite frankly falls into that category of living not quite 20 miles, but pretty close from where I grew up, you know, it's hard to give practical advice. So I love that. That's something that we can take away from the conversation today. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here on you and talk in terms of, you know, your experience as a leader and in thinking about hiring into your team. What do you look for in your direct reports? And I'll have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah, I think I may have an answer for you that you've probably already heard 100 times, but obviously core values, you know, or the most important thing. I don't need to describe those core values to you. It's sometimes difficult to get those, you know, in an interview when you hire, but you know, that's why internships probably are also a good way, you know, to get to know people. But I think those core values are very important. You know, when it comes to technical skills, I am pretty demanding because I love the technical aspects of many things. I know how to price an option and I know how to calculate certain things. And so I have a pretty mathematical, statistical mindset, and I'd like to see that in other people. However, if people show an ability to learn, that's good enough for me. You know, you don't need to have the answer to every technical question I have. If you don't have the answer, you know, then, you know, be open, be honest about it. Or, you know, sometimes, you know, there's an answer that you can have or construct through logic. And so I'd look for the logic in an answer. But definitely when it comes to say the soft skills versus the technical skills, they're equally important. I believe that the world has become, you know, a little bit Machiavellian sometimes. I'm still, maybe it's old school, a believer that the how is equally important to the what. When you're hiring people and when you evaluate their performance, I think they're equally important, you know, because if you reach a certain goal, I'd like to understand how you met that goal. Because of the soft skills and the core values I've just referred to, I think you need to display ethical standards and respect and integrity. And if you know, are the biggest money maker in the company, you know, but you can't, you know, have display those values, I think it's a non-starter. So again, coming back, for me, they're equally important, soft skills and technical skills. But if there's one thing, you know, that is a no-go, is if it is a lack of soft skills.
No, and I absolutely love that. Just because Scotty and I talk about this all the time, where it's, you know, you have a treasury can get pretty broad, but it still has its limits, right? And when you're going, part of the interview prep, where I think like when people go to interview with treasurers or with leaders that they don't necessarily pick up is it's okay to have gaps. Or like to not be the perfect technical fit or whatever it is. But if you know that, study up, be aware of it, and talk through how you would be able to cover that gap and like your learning plan. Start to be forward thinking about it so that you're not caught off guard by technical questions, or just it's okay to admit that you don't know and talk about how you would attack answers or questions that you don't know the answer to. Don't try to fake your way through it, because all of a sudden that's where the ethics and integrity comes in. And then you're starting off kind of in a distrustful manner right off the bat. So, you know, it's as I was listening to your answer, it was just like, yeah, it kind of brought it together for me why Scotty and I talk about this so much.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Scotty, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, Joe, you probably were reading my face there. I was trying to interpret a question that we got from Adnan. Adnan, appreciate the question. I'm going to try and summarize here and pose this to Michel and you know, insofar as I understand it. So it's a perfect segue too, in terms of what we were just talking about. And basically the question is, how do you weigh the relationship skills of a treasurer in terms of building relationships with both internal and external stakeholders versus technical skills? You may have already kind of alluded to your answer here, but just specifically around, you know, building relationships versus technical skills. And I think the question is in terms of the treasurer's role.
Yes, in the terms of treasurer's role, obviously you need to build relationships with many different stakeholders, internal, external. I don't have to go over the entire list. You need to be a very effective relationship builder, for the reasons that we all know. Having said that, I think the technical skills are extremely important in Treasury, because we are sometimes dealing with complex instruments, with complex decisions in uncertainty. And I think you need to have good analytical skills to understand what is being presented to you, what the possible outcomes are, and how to analyze that. So I do believe that if you want to deal with, say, bankers, you need to understand exactly how they're pricing things. You need to understand, how they present things. You need to understand legal contracts. I have seen many treasurers making a mistake in overlooking small details in a legal contract, and then said, oops, is that what it's meant to be? Is that what we needed to do? Is that what we needed to comply with? So I would have a word of caution. You become a specialist. You need to get into the details, understand the details, anticipate the details. And so I cannot underestimate, the skills of a treasurer. The networking is all great. The relationship skills, it's a necessity. But I cannot stress enough, that those technical skills are an absolute must. You need to understand how things work. And then you become a better decision maker.
Oh, that's great advice, and it does tie into the next question that I have for you. And you've sat in the group treasurer seat over at Adidas. You've had a very long and successful treasurer career, and you don't get that way, and you're not a successful leader if you can't manage up and manage down, right? So I guess from your perspective, what makes a successful treasurer in the eyes of the C-level or the board, and from your perspective?
And just, as a treasurer, I also had responsibility for other areas as well. So I included things like pension, real estate, and in the end, some of the decision making is similar. Where am I going with this is that the quality of decision making, I think, is very critical in Treasury. And I will give you an example of today, the pandemic. How many treasurers out there were caught by surprise? How many treasurers had to scramble to put a plan together, a funding plan, a facility, who had not anticipated? And it's not the first time I see it. I saw with 9/11. Goodness, what were we doing? What were we thinking? We didn't see 9/11 coming. And I believe, it is the role of a treasurer, but also of a CFO, but I think primarily a treasurer, because I believe a treasurer makes decisions in a risky environment, uncertain environment. And I believe a treasurer needs to leverage that across the organization. And I'm talking about now enterprise-wide risk management, because in the end, the treasurer is responsible for cash flows. He needs to understand the cash flow as risk, because I know so many examples of where people will come to me, well, look at the value of this thing, look at the profit of this thing, and I will answer profit and value, or an opinion or an interpretation. Cash is a fact. And so as a treasurer, you need to ensure, that people make a good decision and take into account, all the possible scenarios. And I believe that a pandemic, should have been part of a treasurer's risk scenario as well. And you cannot be caught by surprise. So going forward, I believe, that the treasurer needs to be an enterprise-wide risk thinker and advocate, and also needs to primarily think in terms of cash flows and not in terms of profit or values.
That's an awesome answer. Thank you very much. That's you saw me and Scotty shaking our heads yes as it was going along, and it's just like, man, you're hitting the nail on the head there.
You're too kind, Joe. Thank you.
So Michel, we've got one more question prepared for you, and then there's a really great follow-up question that came from the audience here. So just let me begin with the question we have prepared, which is, given what we're seeing right now in technology and the trends and the acceleration of change. How do you see the role of the treasurer changing in the coming years?
Yeah, I believe that the technology will enable better decision quality making. And what I am saying is I'm talking about data analysis. I think a treasurer needs to look at different data within the organization and needs to understand those, to prepare for certain financial scenarios. So I see a lot of data analytics in a treasurer job, understanding that. I believe that the scenario analysis that I just referred to needs to become part of that. I get back to that enterprise-wide risk management. That can only be accomplished, with an enterprise-wide risk management model. And so there's a lot of modeling, and I understand, that this is the holy grail, and nothing's perfect because garbage in is garbage out. But I do believe that the treasurer is becoming that person, that applies the technology to support a type of enterprise-wide risk management thinking and decision making. And I'll give you an example, of something that I was involved with Dow Chemical. It's now called Dow Inc. But I was one of the pioneers to launch a different type of decision making in the company, because a lot of decision making is done on, what you call the NPV analysis and that type of thing. And in the end, we call that deterministic decision making, because it's based on a certain scenario and you make a decision and you believe that scenario plays out. The whole company moved using different platform and different technology to what we called probabilistic decision making. And so where you put in different drivers, different risk factors. What if this happens? What happens to the NPV of my project? So that's type of probabilistic decision making that can only be done through a rollout of technology and a lot of training and development. Obviously, that goes hand in hand. But I believe, that technology is going to primarily support the quality of decision making going forward.
Yeah, we've heard that time and time again, and it follows that trend, right? The technology is going to handle a lot of the day-to-day, the tactical stuff, and it's going to produce that output, and it's going to free up the treasury practitioners to actually take that, analyze it, decide what to do, and make more effective decisions. And I couldn't agree. Granted, I'm not a practitioner, but based on the conversations I've had, couldn't agree with you more.
Good. And it's again a follow-up question to that. And so let me make sure I'm trying to handle this in real time. The question actually specifically is, what are tools one can use to keep up with the continuing technology changes in Treasury? And perhaps that's a question Joe and I maybe could address when it comes to tools to handle keeping up with continuing technology. I'd like to actually pose the question. Well, you know what, Michel, I'm sure you have an opinion on that. What would you say? Thank you, Myra, for your question.
I can't say I understand or know the entire set of tools, when it comes to technological development that can support the treasury, because there's hundreds of thousands out there. But I think, one of the technical tools I believe will be, in terms of payment systems. There's a lot of things happening in the payments world. There's a lot of financial service providers that are taking this business away from the banks. I believe, that as a treasurer, you need to look at those technologies, embrace those technologies, and be prepared, to make your payments more frictionless and much more cost effective, because I do believe there's a lot of technology being developed, that makes that much more effective. But also I want to stress the technology that's being developed in risk management. And there are a number of tools out there, that help you with the data analysis, with the probabilistic decision making. I know, that there are companies out there that specialize in selling those tools to companies, but I would also very strongly encourage to look at those decision-making tools that are being presented out there. And I'll give you an example. In Treasury, many Treasury people will use options. An option is a decision in an uncertain environment, with many different possible outcomes. apply those things to business decisions. Think about how you can apply that technology to the business decisions and saying, maybe we should be looking at our business decision making in a different way as well. So I would probably say use that technology and leverage it in the company.
Yeah, that's and it goes along with the to that point. I mean, obviously you have your go-tos and you figure out the different sources of information. Obviously, anyone can Google or anything like that, but to keep up to date on this type of stuff, talk to your vendors, talk to your bankers, find out what's coming down the pike, and really start to educate yourself. People will have conversations. They're service industry professionals, just like Scotty and I are. So it's just it may not necessarily result in a sale or any kind of commitment. You can have those exploratory conversations to keep your thumb or your thumb on the pulse of what's going on around you. And the more that you're talking to people that are outside of the four walls of your office, the more you're going to learn, and that's how you develop yourself.
That's right, Joe, and that ties back in, with the networking opportunities. Just embrace and pursue them. They're a critical part of your own personal development, but also, of your company's development. You need to stay abreast of those technologies, and I think one of the best ways is exactly that. Is you get it from your network.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's not necessarily a tool. It's very old school in terms of how best to learn, and you guys nailed it. It really is picking your head up outside of your organization and speaking with other practitioners in other places. A great segue to the latest question, perhaps the last question that we've gotten from the community, which is actually posed to all of us. So Michel, I'll pitch it to you first. And then Joe, maybe you can comment on it as well. And if I'm sure you guys will cover it, but if there's anything left, I'll take it from there. But basically, Ricardo, thank you for your question, is asking how you view changing sectors or changing industries in Treasury. So I think what he's referring to is moving from one type of business to another, and how maybe easier, challenging that can be. Yeah.
I actually thought it was amazingly similar, my experiences, even though they're vastly different companies. I worked for a commodity company. They would probably not want to hear that because they have specialties as well, but it's primarily a commodity company. And went to a super cool marketing company, where everyone loved the products. And so that's a big change. I think the changes were more in terms of, the capital intensity, some priorities about decision-making, global decision-making versus local decision-making. I think that's a big difference. And so for me, that was the big change, was really, once you have a commodity, you have a global product. Once you have something that appeals to passion, you probably have to adjust a little bit more to local tastes and desires. And so that's a different setup, so I think, for whatever reason, a global commodity company has a little bit more of a straightforward risk environment, than a company, that needs to basically speak to all the customers' preferences. And so that was, I think, a big change. But something that I wanted to also repeat, if you don't mind going back earlier, about technology and all these things. Try to do something that has not been done before. Yeah. Embrace that as well, because we said, look around and see what's happening, but also be creative yourself. You come up with something new, a new idea. You don't need to get that necessarily from somebody else, or maybe you can combine existing things. But that, I think, is a powerful thing about switching sectors, by the way, because you do learn, from the best in certain sectors and apply that in other sectors. And I think that's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, that absolutely falls into where I was going to go with my answer on this too. And I want to throw out the quick disclaimer that I'm not trying to oversimplify Treasury. Again, I am not a technical person. I'm not a practitioner, but from an outsider's perspective, knowing this area for over a year, it's Treasury is Treasury. You have your little nuances from industry to industry. But at the end of the day, it's understanding how money is made by the business and what to do with that money after it's made. And I think when people go to hire into their teams, or maybe we think about this a little bit too much when we're going to change industries and deciding on whether or not to make a change in industry, or if we're sitting in the hiring manager seat, determining whether or not we should hire someone from a different industry. We want to hire the finished product that is already familiar, already knows everything, opposed to taking the chance and bringing a new thought or line of thought or different way of doing things in. And that's a lot of the coaching that we do with clients is trying to break them of that mentality, because that's how you develop, and that's how you develop your team. It's how you develop your processes, your controls. I mean, you take best practices or stuff that you've learned along the way from other industries and apply them to the seat that you're sitting in, and usually pretty good things happen.
Yeah, you guys have done a great job kind of summarizing. I think, to put my opinion and a fine point on it here, I would only add that we talk a lot about diversity, Treasury Talent over the course of the last year, and the importance of it. And diversity of thought is really the most critical piece there. So I think, Michel, you mentioned obviously that the coming from one industry to another, maybe bringing best practices or a different way of doing things. Joe, you just reiterated that point and the importance of it, and because that does, and you see it all the time, that does lead to new creative kind of solutions for difficult problems. So I would say, yeah, I think it's you guys did a great job covering it, and that'd be the only thing I would add.
Do we have any other questions from the community?
I'm not seeing anything else, so I guess we'll give a last call here, unless I missed anything. It doesn't look like I did. So,
all right. Well, with that, Michel, again, thank you so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed the conversation. I know I could speak for Scotty in saying that he did as well. You can tell by just the way that we're interacting with your answers. And Treasury community, thanks again for really taking the time to join us throughout the course of this year. 2020 has been a wild ride. This is our last one for this year. We look forward to seeing you in 2021. And Michel, again, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We'll let you get back to skiing out in the mountains.
All right. Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone. Take care.
Happy holidays. Bye.